Hey everyone, welcome to On Our Days Off. I'm your host, Jordana. Welcome to the pod. We are having conversations, making space, and figuring it out. Today we have our first guest, Audra Lee, LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist, also owner and creator of Alloy Center for Therapy. Here it is. Thank you for being here. You are the first guest on our pod, On Our Days Off, where we are having conversations, making space, and figuring it out. How are you?
I am doing well today.
Good.
It's so good.
Great. So, my first question, I feel like a lot of times people uh, wait until probably something traumatic happens or things get really bad in life to seek therapy. But what are some reasons to seek therapy prior to things getting to a really bad place?
Um, I think, so I may be biased, but I feel like everyone needs therapy, similar to how you get checkups for your body. I think there is a way where we always need to be in tune with what's going on with our minds. So I think some reasons can just be like being Black in America, working a job, having children, being in a relationship, trying to navigate your dynamic with your partner or your parents. Um, and like therapy can be fulfilling in all of those different settings.
I agree. I agree. Well, to add to that, do you think that having a therapist who can identify with you culturally is important? Because whenever I was preparing for this and just reading different articles, it was talking about how, mainly with Black people, people of color, that sometimes when you have a therapist who really can't relate to you culturally, it may lead to misdiagnosis or it can even turn people off from therapy.
Yeah, I have conversations with a lot of people about this. I don't think that I used to think having someone who reflects your cultural background was really important. I think a little bit less so now because what I think is much more a benefit of focusing on is someone who's culturally competent or culturally aware. And not everybody who looks like us is. And so I think it's important to know having a therapist who's going to be accountable for their privileges, be aware of how they impact relationships, who a therapist who is doing their own work. Some of the questions I would ask if I was looking for a therapist, are you in therapy yourself? Right? Are you accountable for your privilege? What does that look like in terms of our sessions? So having a clinician who is going to speak to your experience is awesome, but you also want someone who is going to be culturally aware. And that could be a white person, a Black person, an Asian person. But if they are doing the work mentally and thinking about these things, then you have someone who is, um, you know, prepared to speak to things that have happened or acknowledge that they don't know.
That's fair. I never thought about that. I've been to therapy. I started therapy probably almost a decade ago now. But my therapist was a Black woman. So I feel like just because she's a Black woman, she can understand me better. I'm not saying I wouldn't see a therapist who is not Black, but that's a good point of view. I never thought about it that way, I guess. Just because it's hard, just how you said, because yes, being Black in America, being Black at work, being just Black every day, it's hard to trust someone with your emotions
Totally.
and your mental health if you feel like they're going to tell you maybe it's not real or shoot it down.
And I would say assess where you're at in your life too, because like maybe my first therapist, my first ever therapist, maybe I do need them to be a Black person. Maybe that's the only way I can feel really comfortable. But maybe after I've been in therapy for a few years, that's not, I feel a little bit more safe and confident so that I don't need that to be present. And that depends on where you're at in life. And I think, what's happening in the world. I think like when everything happened with Floyd, I think a lot of people were looking for a safe space, an affinity group safe space. So, having someone who could specifically talk about those things that was a person of color and not really feeling comfortable to be around someone who isn't.
Um, I guess my next question is because it's hard even just showing up as yourself, whether you're because you're Black or a person of color, or if you're a person from a different community like LGBTQ, just maybe if you feel like you're from a marginalized group of people. Um, do you think that sometimes being like vulnerable or transparent or showing up as yourself, do you think that can be, I guess, harmful? Because sometimes I feel like when you show up as yourself or when you're honest about how you're really feeling, sometimes I feel like people don't really care, or sometimes people might make inappropriate comments or just kind of use what you're going through as like a topic of discussion. But it's kind of hard for me. That's something that I struggle with, is like being vulnerable or transparent, because sometimes I feel like people really don't care,
Gotcha.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think so. One of the things that I typically work on with my clients is being able to always be yourself and be
Mhm.
transparent, always lead with your authentic self. But what that requires is addressing what happens in people's reactions to that. How do you manage and how do you address if you're being your authentic self and maybe people don't understand it, they're reactive to it, they say hurtful things, how you can respond to that in a way that still allows you to be transparent and authentic and not internalize someone else's limitations, right? So I would say it's more detrimental to not be authentic. Always be authentic, but figuring out how to manage people's response to your authenticity, because I think that is hard for a lot of people to hold. But never, 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 never are we changing ourselves.
Good point. Good point. So, in my research, which I'm sorry, I forgot to even say, you are an LMFT, licensed marriage family therapist, also owner and creator of Alloy Center for Therapy. And you've been doing this for over 10 years. And in my research, I found that LMFTs, they can't prescribe medicine, but you all can diagnose. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So, just to speak to my experience, I think now I'm more comfortable talking about it. But like I said, when I first started therapy, this was almost a decade ago. I had a traumatic event, and just in like the early stages of therapy and getting through it, I was prescribed medication just to help me with my anxiety, because I was having really bad anxiety attacks. Um, but do you see a lot of people come in who are in therapy with a combination of medication? And also, can you just speak to, I feel like, the stigma around people being on medication? Because I feel like maybe now we can talk about it, but I feel like before it's like, oh, they're on medication, like they must be crazy. Or
Totally.
maybe now we can have more of a conversation about it.
Yeah. There's a lot of history in the mental health field that was um oppressive and detrimental, and a lot of things that have happened that has, like, I don't want to for a minute suggest that the stigma is out of nowhere, because there's a lot of things in the history of mental health that have happened that were like so egregious. You know, psychiatrists and mental health professionals doing really unethical work. And so I think what we see now is people's reactions to feeling unsafe with that level of power, someone having that level of power over your mind.
Yeah.
So the stigma is one, just about not knowing or not understanding. And then the other piece is like, oh no, there's been like some stuff that's really happened in the past that we know about and don't want to feel like we're victims again. So I understand it, and I try to hold that and be aware that people are speaking to their own reactions to not knowing, and then also feeling like I don't want to be taken advantage of.
Right.
I think that medication is never something that so typically I work with referring out. If I see clients and I do talk therapy.
Okay.
But if I see that someone's symptoms rise to a level where I think medication will be helpful, then I refer to a psychiatrist. I think that medication is never my first line of defense.
Right.
I think that it is a wonderful additive to therapy when your body might be in a very heightened state from trauma. Like our nervous systems get just out of whack sometimes. That could be I'm thinking about genetic makeup,
Okay.
and that these are things that it doesn't mean if you get on medication that you're bad or wrong or giving up or weak, but that your body is in a state of imbalance, and anything can throw that off, and anyone can be in a space where they need medication. And so what the medication does is just creates a bit of a alignment so that you can now have a stable foundation within inside of your body, so that the things that we talk about actually feel attainable. If you're like this, your anxiety is heightened, your body is always feeling like it's out of whack, or race, your mind is racing or your heart's racing, it's really hard to talk about coping strategies. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's it. And the doctor who prescribed it to me, it was actually my PCP. It wasn't a psychiatrist, but he was just like, I'm just going to literally write you this one-time prescription for Xanax just to help you with your anxiety. Like, we're not going to make this a continual thing. We're just going to give this to you to get through this stage. And it was like that and therapy. So, yeah, I think that's a good point. But I think probably, like I said, it would be even back then. I mean, I wasn't telling tons of people I was taking Xanax.
Gotcha.
I think I literally shared it with one person. But yeah, I think that's a good point, because yeah, you do need to be in the right state to receive therapy.
Can I ask you, what was the concern if you did share? Like, what did you think would happen if you shared it?
I think my concern was just people will just talk about me like something's wrong with me versus asking, well, maybe we should be more, maybe we shouldn't judge her like what's wrong with her, more like, well, what happened to her that she would need this, instead of it being like coming from a place of compassion or actually genuine concern is what I'm
Mhm.
saying.
Oh, gotcha.
So um I also think that, I think within different communities of people culturally, I am a spiritual person. I would say religious person. I haven't been to church in many, many years, so I just want to say that. But I read my scripture, I pray, but sometimes it's hard to get people to understand that there's a difference between seeking counsel from like a pastor or a nun or a preacher versus actually speaking to a trained professional. So how do we get people to understand that there's a difference in that? And I'm not saying, like, I'm not frowning upon that, because I absolutely, prayer works, reading my scripture helps, but sometimes that's just not good enough.
Totally. Yeah. That's a hard one. I think especially in certain communities, especially people of color, we
Yeah.
church and our spiritual journeys are like very central to our identity. And for a long time, again, with the history, it's been pray about it or
Right.
go and seek answers from God. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think for a while that was all we had access to. So understanding that it's not taking away from, but more so again, adding to and
Right.
your spiritual journey.
Right.
Both, you can have both. There doesn't have to be one or the other. And I'm not there are therapists who are grounded in spiritual and Christian counseling, or religious counseling. That's not how I practice or what I lead with. But whatever it is that is a tool in your toolbox, a strength of yours, meaning the client, we bring that into session. So if religion and spirituality is something that is important to you, that's a wonderful, wonderful tool to access when things get hard, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but there's also, it's not just about feeling with mental health. There's a real science behind our behavioral patterns, our thought processes, and the ways in which they function and can become dysfunctional. That's something that you need a trained professional to be able to help you understand and then work through. Because there is the emotional component, but then there is the rational, logical, scientific component. And so again, with along with the spirituality and the religious piece, I think therapy can help strengthen your ability to understand the science behind why you do the things you do, right? And help you cope with those things.
What's a just gentle, compassionate way you think to maybe suggest someone should seek therapy? Because I think it can be very offensive to tell someone like you need to talk to someone or you need therapy.
Yeah, that doesn't always go over well.
Yeah.
Disagreements. The way that I have done it in my family, as a therapist, who people will say, "Oh, I love what you do. I'm so proud of you," and I'll say, "Well, would you go to therapy?" And they're like, "Oh no." But I'm proud of you, right? And so
Right.
the ways that I try to uh, challenge people to go is only by sharing my own experience.
Okay.
So being vulnerable to say, I'm a therapist who goes to therapy. This is why I go to therapy. This is what it's been helpful for. And when I have seen my family members or friends who have been resistant decide to go, it was because they've seen the ways that I grew. And they were like, "Oh, you go to therapy, you're working on yourself." And I see the progression. I see the progression in your relationships, in the way you show up, in your life. So, now I'm more curious about it.
Yeah.
So just leading by example, I think, is a wonderful strategy.
What about if you go to someone for help, or you go to a loved one or a friend or someone who you feel you can be vulnerable with, and they kind of shame you for it? Because I think it takes so much courage to even say, I think I need to talk to someone. And then they're like, girl, there ain't nothing wrong with you. Like, you're fine.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just takes so much to even say it in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a hard one.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that I think in those situations is making sure that you are attending to yourself. Like if I say something, I'm being vulnerable and I'm being open, and then someone projects their insecurities onto me. The very first thing that I'm going to do before I respond is to say, "Whoo, that was hurtful. Like that hurt."
Yeah.
So I'm going to attend to my hurt first, identify like, what do I need in this moment? Do I just need to walk away? Do I need to get in my car and leave? Do I need to call my partner? Like, do I need to go get ice cream? Like, do I need a cocktail? What do I need in this
Right.
moment? Is receiving that blow. And then after you come back down and you're a little bit more in a less reactive state, then you decide what you want to do with that relationship. Do you want to address it? Is it worth addressing it for you? Do you want to explain to the person how they made you feel? Do you want to set boundaries and create some space and distance from the relationship? So first attend to yourself always.
Okay.
Makes sense?
It makes sense. It makes sense for sure. I want to move on just to talk about like marriage and relationships because I know you specialize in that. Um, First off, do you feel whenever couples, or I don't know if you just get couples or you're actually getting married people, is there normally one person who's more willing to go than the other? Like one person is being dragged into the session, or is it usually like a shared, um, I guess, desire to seek therapy when married couples come to you?
I think being in the area that I'm in, which is DC, Maryland, Virginia area.
Mm-hmm.
There is a little bit of a bubble in that people are really open to therapy.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, it's it's interesting coming from Pittsburgh, being from Pittsburgh originally. This is vastly different. People are like, therapy. We openly talk about it. We talk about it at work. We call our therapist by name. They are very culturally here. People embrace therapy as something that is important to have in their daily lifestyle. So I see couples who are both willing to come. There are the situations where one person initiates therapy and the other is more resistant. For me, I need buy-in from both people. And because that's the only way that it's going to be effective. And if one person is dragging the other person and the other person has not bought into therapy, it almost starts to create a abusive dynamic where you're forcing, like now I'm forcing things on you. And
Right.
that doesn't create emotional safety. So I always say in the first session, are you both here because you want to be here? Is there any resistance to therapy or this process? If there is, let's talk about it. And by the end of that first session, I need a yes from both people. If that doesn't happen, then I say take time, right? Take time, because you don't want your partner to be resistant, because it's not going to work.
Do you think that if you don't deal with your trauma before marriage or even dating seriously, because I was listening to something, I forget who said this. I thought it was really interesting. They said that your childhood never ends.
Mm,
And if you don't deal with things that happen to you growing up, um, that all those things will be drudged up in your relationship.
absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Yes. I agree fully. I think, and again, every clinician thinks differently about this. So it's a little bit of a theoretical belief system. Like, do you believe your childhood impacts your behavior in adulthood? Some clinicians say no, no. Like it's completely separate. For me, in the way that I practice, I think it all plays a role. There's no way where we can disconnect from our childhood, and a lot of times we chronologically grow up in age, right? So like I can be 34, but in a specific area of my life, I might be emotionally 5.
Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
acknowledging that and understanding that, and then helping my partner know that, also allows for him to speak to my 5-year-old self when it comes up versus the 34-year-old me.
Got it.
Right.
That's a good point. What about like as parents? Because like how you said, whenever you're growing up and you become an adult, I feel like there's so many things that have been passed down, like from as far as parenting, how your parents parent you, how your grandparents parented your parents, and then you kind of look back and you just are like, "Dude, that stuff is kind of unhealthy. Like that kind of wasn't probably the best way we should have been raising everybody."
Yeah.
Um, so how do you and I think it's hard, even I'm not a parent, I'm just talking about as an individual, it's hard to not hard, but I think coming to the realization that you need to unlearn some things. Um, so what would be besides therapy, what's just like a suggestion or a tip if you're a parent and you're kind of like, this is probably not how, like I need to do things differently than my parents did and like stick to it. Cause I also feel like sometimes when I have family or friends who are parents and you see them around the grandparents and the grandparents kind of want to come in and they want you to raise your kids how they raised you.
Totally. Yeah. That's a really good question. I just was having a conversation yesterday about this very thing, that I don't know if this happened or you experienced this, but when we grew up, if one kid did something wrong, right, did something wrong, all the kids would get spankings. And I was like, that was so toxic. That all
Yeah.
their concept was so toxic. We're just gonna, well, first of all, it's, like we're gonna beat you all because one kid did this thing.
Right.
So, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that have been done that now we look back. At the time, it didn't seem unhealthy. At the time, it felt like, no, this is what we need to do.
Right.
So now in retrospect, we're like, oh, wow, we could have done some things differently. And so becoming a parent and recognizing that, I think is huge. And so I think parents should be proud of themselves for even noticing that they want to do something different. I think,
Absolutely.
so that's the first thing. Be proud of yourself. You recognize that there's a cycle that you want to break. I think two is to know and be aware that you will perpetuate it. You will.
You will?
Will in moments. And so when that happens, be kind to yourself and recognize that you have an opportunity in that moment to correct it. So parents need to get really comfortable with saying, I apologize. Because what happens is people say, the moment we recognize, oh, that's unhealthy, there is no immediate switch to change behavior. It's a process. And so in that process, success and growth doesn't look like this. It looks like this. So there will be moments where you're so frustrated, where you react in the same way your mother did or your father did. Because that is a knee-jerk response. That's a reactive response. And reactivity comes from familiarity. We go back, we snap back like a rubber band to what we always knew, even if it was unhealthy. In those moments, though, again, the only thing that will help to continue to allow you to grow and evolve is to say, ooh, I recognize I did that. This was a moment. I don't want to continue to perpetuate that. I need to apologize. I need to be kind to myself, and I need to apologize to my child. Right.
I like that. I think for me, when I was in therapy, it was very, as far as coming to a level of self-awareness and being able to call yourself out, it was very awkward and it's uncomfortable when you realize that you're handling things wrong. And even though people may be doing, maybe someone has done something to you that has imposed trauma on you, um, I think just for me, what it really was learning to set boundaries with people. Is because I didn't have boundaries with people. I was ignoring red flags in relationships, and that was something that I had to work on. So I think, do you think that's part of the reason maybe why some people are afraid of therapy? Because deep down inside, maybe some people do know the things that they are doing are unhealthy, but it's hard to come to actually that level of self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing I say all the time, this is not an easy journey. And again, recognizing that, like, just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean I don't know that, like, to grow in self-awareness and to grow in accountability, because that's what happens when
Mm-hmm.
you become more self-aware. Now you have to be accountable for your behavior. That is hard,
It's very hard.
right? When it's like, damn, I have to say sorry. I have to apologize for my behavior. I have to be accountable for my actions. Like, and I have to pay bills. So people, yeah, I think I don't know, to your point, I don't know if it's always conscious, but I think subconsciously we don't always want to be that accountable, be that aware, because it is a hard journey to keep maintaining that. It's like working out. You don't get to a certain, weight or body composition and just stay there. You got to continue to work that out in order to be able to maintain it. And similar to the gym, it's like, I don't really want to go. I have to, but I don't necessarily want to. So yeah, I get that.
How do you know if you're the toxic person in the relationship? Because I feel like it's pretty easy to point out, like, this person is mistreating me and doing me wrong, but what are signs that like maybe it's you?
So what I always say to that is, you are the toxic person. Everybody is.
Okay.
Meaning, all have moments where we get toxic as hell. So if you're questioning, are you? Yes, you are. Then the better question to ask after that is, how am I toxic? What ways do I become toxic? So again, that creates a dynamic where we're not blaming one person and demonizing them as if they are like the scapegoat, but like understanding a relationship is 50-50. Each person is playing into a dynamic that creates toxicity. So what's your piece, and then what's the other person's piece? So yes, you're toxic. And how are you toxic? And what ways can you work on that?
I was on your I'm sorry. Were you
No.
finished? Okay, okay. I was on your Instagram page, the page for Alloy Therapy. I saw one of your posts. I liked it. You had posed the question, is cussing okay in therapy? I remember I cussed one time in therapy, and to be fair, it was an older Black woman, so she probably was old enough to be my mom, and it was a Christian counselor. I dropped the F-bomb, and I immediately just felt, I was like, I shouldn't have said that. I felt bad for saying it. But you had said therapists are not the respectability police.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's your session. However you need to express yourself is how you need to express yourself. So it's not about whether you use a word that we as a society or culturally say is bad, but more so how does that inform what you're trying to express? Now, I think that's different than being disrespectful. So like, you're not calling me a bitch in session, and then that's okay. Where you can cuss to express yourself, but like disrespect is something. And again, every clinician thinks differently about this. But for me, I don't, this is a relationship. And so we're not disrespecting each other. So that's the only boundary I would put up around that. But yeah, cuss away.
Is there any like mantra you tell your clients to practice, or anything you practice yourself just like on a daily basis, just to kind of help get your day started, or before you go into work, or before you do anything? Is there anything that you like to leave people with?
Um, that's a good question. I There's not one specific mantra, but I think a lot of times I find myself talking about power and leaving my clients with, you are powerful, and you do have power to be able to create the life that you want, and recognizing that power. And power doesn't isn't overt. It's just clear, being very clear in where you stand. So I think that's one thing that I always try to do. Is like, what's my choice and my power in this situation? Is something I always ask myself when I get anxious, when I feel like I don't have any options, when I feel backed up in a corner, when I feel like, I should do something. I ask myself, what is my power here? So that really helps me to make a choice and understand that I always have choices. Unless we're in like an abusive, oppressive situation, which is a different conversation, we always have choices.
That's good. I like that. I like that. Thank you so much for being here. Audra Lee, LMFT, licensed marriage family therapist, owner and creator of Alloy Center of Therapy. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for being here.
Having me.
All right, come back.
Hey, thank you.
All right, have a good day. Hey friends, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube page, On Our Days Off. You can also follow us on Instagram at On Our Days Off, and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Please be sure to leave a comment and tell us what you thought about the episode.